2 centuries of conquest had turned the Macedonian Phalanx into a legend you could measure in wood and iron, the Sarissa. Leveled in a forest of points, a moving wall that made brave men hesitate. It was Alexander's inheritance, polished into doctrine, and it demanded the world stay flat. At Pydna in 168 BC, Rome brought something less beautiful and more dangerous, a legion built to keep working when the plan breaks. When uneven ground cracked the spear wall into gaps, Rome didn't defeat the phalanx from the outside, Rome went in. Perseus of Macedon wore a crown heavy with echoes. Ancient sources portray him as a capable ruler. But capability is not the same as inevitability, and Alexander's inevitable age was gone. Macedon still had the name, the prestige, the old lightning in its blood. Yet the world around it had changed into something colder and more crowded. Rome was no longer a distant nuisance across the sea. After earlier wars and settlements, Roman influence pressed outward like a tightening ring, building friendships, obligations, and protections that could become chains overnight. Another Macedonian war did not have to be planned like a grand invasion. It could ignite from suspicion, diplomacy, and the simple fact that Rome's idea of security kept expanding until it touched Macedon's borders. So Perseus leaned into what Macedon could still claim with absolute clarity: the phalanx. Not merely a formation, but an identity, Alexander's legacy arranged into 16 ranks of discipline and pike points, promising order in a messy world. It was pride, and it was dependency. Because when a kingdom ties its survival to one perfect shape, it begins to fear any battlefield that refuses to stay perfect. That is the real stake behind Pydna, not only whose banners hold a line of ground, but whose model of war becomes the Mediterranean's native language. Macedon needed the world to be flat and obedient. Rome arrived with institutions, allies, and an army designed to keep fighting when the world isn't. Lucius Aemilius Paulus steps into this story without the glitter of a conqueror poet. Ancient accounts present him as disciplined and exacting, a man who trusts order because Rome has taught him how to manufacture it through training, supply, punishment, reward, and the slow grind of procedure. He is not the point. He is the proof that Rome can produce commanders the way a forge produces blades. The legion behind him is built on the same principle. It does not bet everything on one perfect line, but on many small decisions made under pressure, units that can shift, brace, and reform, guided by officers who can act without waiting for a distant signal. When the front is checked, the system does not freeze. It tries something else, because it was designed for the moment when dust, noise, and surprise shatter the plan. And Rome rarely fights alone. Its power travels through allies, client cities, and promises of freedom that ancient politics often treated as a lever as much as a virtue. Even Roman commanders answer to the pull of the Senate, the demands of reputation, and the necessity of bringing results home. That is the empire's cold advantage, a web that constrains and empowers at the same time, and an army trained to search for seams, never to worship walls. The phalanx was geometry made flesh. Macedonian doctrine depended on flat ground, locked shields, and a single forward while 16 ranks pressing as one. Pikes projecting a danger zone that punished anything foolish enough to meet it head-on. In its proper shape, it did not need improvisation. It needed obedience, alignment, and the world to stay orderly. Roman practice suggests the opposite assumption: the world will not cooperate. The legion is built for broken terrain and imperfect information, for dust and noise, and sudden gaps that no general can fully see. It fights in pieces that can become a whole again, with officers and small units trained to act on opportunity without waiting for a flawless signal. That is why Pydna matters beyond one afternoon in 168 BC. It is centralized perfection colliding with decentralized problem-solving. And the winner will teach the Mediterranean how power should move, how armies should be organized, how commands should be obeyed, how empires should adapt. The coming battle will not be decided by ideology or pride, but by the environment itself, because once the ground breaks, the geometry, Rome can turn openings into destiny. Night settled over the camps near Pydna like a lid pressed down on boiling water. Fires burned low. Men spoke in half voices, and the space between the armies felt smaller than the distance on the ground because everyone could sense how quickly it would vanish. After days of maneuvering, both sides faced the same silence, yet neither heard the same meaning in it. Ancient writers later report signs and omens circling the hours before battle, including accounts of a darkened moon that men struggled to interpret. In one camp, such stories could sharpen confidence into certainty, as if the heavens were confirming what history had already promised. In the other, the same rumors could be treated as noise, another variable in a world where fear always tries to dress itself as prophecy. Either way, the important fact was not the sky, but the way belief traveled through ranks faster than any messenger. For the Macedonians, morale drew strength from inheritance. The phalanx had a reputation that could intimidate before it ever advanced. The Sarissa wall was not just equipment, it was a memory of victories, a discipline that made men feel protected by the formation itself. The Romans leaned on a different source of steadiness: procedure, drill, the confidence that if one part buckled, another would take its place, and the whole would still function. One army felt chosen by legacy, the other felt carried by a system. And that is how misread signals begin, when confidence tells you the battle will unfold the way it always has, or the way it is supposed to. In the dark, commanders could only guess at the enemy's posture, and soldiers could only imagine what waited beyond the firelight. By morning, the first clashes would be shaped as much by what both sides believed they were seeing as by what was truly happening until the battlefield corrected them. The phalanx came on like a single creature. Its breath, the scrape of sandals, and the dry hiss of wood shifting in thousands of hands. Sarisses leveled, points multiplying into a horizon of needles. And the battlefield seemed to shrink into one brutal question. Could anything live in front of that wall? For a moment, the old legend looked completely real. Alexander's inheritance moving forward, demanding that Rome step back or be pinned in place. When the formation held its proper shape, it ruled distance. The first ranks projected a killing zone that forced an enemy to halt before he could even reach a shield, while the interlocked line behind them pushed with relentless, shared weight to the men facing it. It wasn't just weapon length, it was the sensation of being denied the right to close, denied the comfort of contact, held at spear's end while the wall advanced. To the Macedonians inside it, that pressure felt like certainty, each step reinforced by the ranks behind, each man strengthened by the geometry he belonged to. The Romans did not answer with heroic charges or desperate bravado. They absorbed, tested, and managed the impact, giving ground where they had to without turning it into a collapse, probing for where the line was strongest and where it might be strained. Their discipline showed in what they did not do. They did not throw themselves into points. They waited, watched, and trusted that the battle would eventually offer something other than the front of a perfect wall. This is where the popular image starts to lie by being too simple. The victory was not a single clever stunt, not soldiers, magically slipping under a forest of pikes as if the formation were a stage prop. The turning point would come when the wall stopped being one wall, when movement and ground and strain carved it into gaps. And Rome recognized those gaps as entrances. The phalanx kept coming, and at first the changes were almost too small to fear. A line wavers. A rank checks its step. Is a few sarissas. Bob as men adjust their grip, ordinary friction in an extraordinary machine. From a distance, it still looks like one wall. Still sounds like certainty. Then the ground begins to argue back. As the formation advances over uneven terrain, the perfect alignment starts to shear, pike points no longer present as one clean horizon. Shields drift out of lock, and the cadence that kept 16 ranks, moving as one turns ragged. The phalanx's power is not in any single soldier, it is in the collective geometry, the shared angle of thousands of weapons. Once that geometry fractures, it cannot simply turn itself back into perfection. Not quickly, not while under pressure, not while every small gap invites a blade. In the Roman line, decisions happen close to the dirt. Centurions and small unit leaders read what the eye can catch through dust and confusion, an interval widening, a section slowing, a corner of the wall bending the wrong way. They do not need the whole battlefield to make sense. They only need a seam. Units peel, surge, and commit into openings as they appear, converting momentary disorder into permanent intrusion. On the Macedonian side, the danger is harder to see from above. A commander can still believe the line is holding because parts of it are, and because the phalanx has always been strongest where it looks strongest straight ahead. But now the wall is no longer a wall. It is a series of cracks, and Rome is already moving toward the spaces between them. The seam opens, and Romans pour into it like water finding a crack in stone. The sound of battle changes less, one crushing impact at the front, more a sudden multiplication of collisions, scattered shouts, metal biting at arm's length. What had been a contest against a wall becomes something uglier and closer, a swarm of fights inside the shape that was supposed to prevent fighting up close. At this distance, the sarissa loses its tyranny. A pike that rules space becomes awkward when space collapses. Its length turns from advantage into burden. Its point trapped among bodies and shields. Its shaft hard to angle when an enemy is already beside it. Roman shields slam and wedge, creating moments measured in inches. And short blades work where long weapons cannot quick thrusts and pressure at the joints of the formation. The phalanx was built to deny contact. Now it is forced to endure it. And the trap tightens from within. The rear ranks cannot easily help without crushing their own front, because the machine was designed to push forward, not to pivot and peel, not to fight in every direction at once. Attacks come from angles the formation was never meant to face. And the discipline that once made it terrifying begins to make it helpless. Men locked into a posture that no longer matches the battlefield. Accounts describe panic spreading as soldiers realize the wall they trusted has dissolved into isolated pockets of resistance. This is the moment the phalanx breaks twice, first in formation, then in the mind. Once it becomes many fights instead of one line. It stops being an army. The collapse does not arrive like a clean ending. It arrives like a chain snapping link by link. Once the phalanx is cut into pieces, each pocket of men is forced to fight without the thing that made them strong. And the battlefield's arithmetic turns cruel, panic spreads faster than orders, and pursuit punishes anyone who cannot reform. What was once a single, forward-facing machine becomes scattered bodies trying to find a front, trying to find each other, trying to remember what the formation used to feel like. Accounts describe the defeat rolling upward as well as outward. Perseus is separated from the certainty he brought to the field. And sources portray the aftermath as flight, confusion, and the slow closing of options. The king who had leaned on Alexander's inheritance is now reduced to the hard problem every defeated ruler faces: survival, surrender, or capture. In time, Perseus is taken, and with him goes the last claim that Macedon can still decide its own fate by force of arms. After Pydna, the outcome is not merely a Roman victory, it is a Roman verdict. Macedon's autonomy effectively ends, and Rome reshapes the region's balance of power through settlement, oversight, and the message that order now has a Roman accent. Greece and its neighbors learn that the center of gravity has shifted, and that Rome's reach is not a raid, it is a system that stays. But even here, the story demands precision. Before we call Pydna the funeral of the Phalanx, we have to name what this battle truly proved and what it did not. Pydna did not prove that pikes were obsolete, or that the sarissa was some doomed relic waiting to be laughed off the battlefield. Under the right conditions, firm ground, disciplined ranks, a clear front, a tight pike formation can still feel like an advancing fortress, controlling distance and breaking a weaker enemy on contact. Historians debate how often later armies copied Macedon perfectly, but the underlying truth remains when cohesion holds. Reach and pressure can decide the day. What Pydna proved is harsher and more interesting. The Phalanx was a masterpiece that demanded its environment cooperate, because its strength was collective geometry, not individual flexibility. When terrain and movement fractured that geometry, the formation did not merely lose power, it lost the ability to solve the problem it was facing. And every small gap became a doorway for an enemy designed to exploit disruption. Rome did not win because its sword was better than a pike. Rome won because its system could convert broken order into opportunity faster than Macedon could restore order. So the clean takeaway is not Phalanx bad, Legion good. The evidence points to something more universal. Rigidity is expensive when the world refuses to stay flat. And the empire that rose after Pydna was the one built to profit from that refusal. An empire whose strength was not a single perfect wall, but a method that kept working when walls began to crack. The lesson of Pydna is not really about pikes or swords. It is about what happens when the ground shifts under a system that requires perfection. The Phalanx was magnificent so long as it could stay aligned, so long as the world stayed predictable, so long as every man remained part of the same clean geometry. The Legion was less elegant and more survivable, built to let small leaders act, to let units adapt, to let order be rebuilt in the middle of disorder. That difference doesn't end when the fighting stops. The Roman future spreads on roads that move armies and messages, on law that organizes strangers into subjects, on logistics that make distance feel smaller, and on command habits that reward initiative when plans collide with reality. Pydna feels like a hinge because after it, the Mediterranean increasingly runs on Roman methods, systems that absorb chaos instead of begging it to go away. Macedon's legacy becomes memory, while Rome's innovation becomes infrastructure, and so Alexander's spear wall meets its true enemy, not courage, not strength, but a world that refuses to stay flat. It does not die in a single glorious charge. It dies in fragments, in gaps. In the moment, the formation can no longer turn fast enough to meet what is already inside it. History asked the Phalanx to bend, and it only knew how to stay straight.